A note on these writings. The American author Truman Capote is often credited with caustically commenting upon the work of his contemporary author, Jack Kerouac, claiming, "That's not writing, that's typing." If you pardon the pun, it was a critique made in cold blood. Well, this is a book of typing. It was written over a 1-month period during the rainy time of September in 2023. I was a resident of the Forrest House, an enchanted retreat within a Sri Lankan coconut plantation named Sri Mathie, which is situated several kilometers from Galle. It was a beautiful place to write, walk, spot huge monitor lizards, feast on sumptuous meals, and swim. This is self-admittedly an odd book. What is perhaps odder or ironic is that I'm writing this brief introduction at my longtime home in Udaipur, Rajasthan, on the day of Holi, the so-called Festival of Color. Yet this is a white book. It is the white book. The one of its main protagonists is in fact a peacock. These writings flutter about a lot, or like fish newly freed from the hook, they wriggle within a basket. Together, these typings make an interesting collection of observations and short narratives, covering politics, art, my studio practice, and life in India. Yes, though written in the land of Raven, not Ram, this is very much an Indian book. India, and specifically Udaipur, has been my home for over 20 years. My art practice derives from collaborations with Indian artists. I'd say I've gotten to know the Indian art scenario pretty well, and have been accepted into its warm but complicated community. Thus my rather outspoken comments about it, which I trust readers will take as helpful, not derogatory. Hindustan has also blessed me, so incredibly much. It has given me the freedom to do and be what I always desired to be. I think I've already said too much. Please enjoy the read and hold on to it like the bouncing camel ride it can be. Try to understand. There are tasty nuggets in here, but also poison pills. Please savor each and forgive me. The White Book. Chapter 1. The Orientalist Types. I think I can type like this. The untypically cool Sri Lankan rain comes and goes. It bangs loudly on the slanted wooden roof. The chair is comfortable enough at the counter, though a tad shorter than the stool that belongs here in the kitchen. I need the backrest and the swivel. Swiveling, as you will discover, is a part of who I am. Thomas Jefferson is credited with inventing the swivel chair, as he found his unyielding Baines chair unsuitable for the contortions he endured while writing the Declaration of Independence. Like Jefferson, I find independence a noble ideal, a great longing of the human heart, to be free, unhindered, exploratory, and adventurous, just like our cave-dwelling ancestors, for whom all of the above was a necessity of survival. Perhaps I'm writing too much, overpraising and glorifying what we now think of as a common office furniture. But all writing begins with typing, and this is the first amalgam of words that has sprung upon the keyboard. I miss paper. Perhaps if I were born in the days just after the invention of papyrus or parchment, I would miss a fine flat rock, a chisel, or a chalky white stone that left powdery scribbles. We are all a product of our times, and times change, even within our own lifetimes. From childhood to the days before death. We will never know how they change after we pass, but they will. In our vanity or our sincerity and our assumptions of wisdom in old age, We might think to pass along something to the future, but so much of what we might think may live on is actually quite forgettable. We cannot even establish the importance of our thoughts in the brief period of our lives. However, it is our hope that our writings, our creations, will help guide a future world. How ridiculous is that? It is, but we dream that it isn't. So what is this book about? Well, I don't really know. Perhaps it is a memoir, or rather, an assemblage of remembered things, events that burrowed their way deep inside my head. Perhaps it is a book of vengeance, or of compassion, or an ear-churning, bewildering assortment of both. In ways, it is a book about Indian art, but not the sort of book you might come to expect from a Kavita Singh, or a Mary Storm, or an Andrew Topsfield, or a B.N. Goswami. Certainly not a Gayatri Spivak or Gayatri Sinha. Can we confuse them? Nor is this Ranjita Skoti, always very nice words, nor Nancy Adajania, opaque and touching upon retribution. What an odd pair of wordsmiths. No, this is a raw and untutored book. It bears a resemblance to Ginsberg's Howl, a Bob Dylan song gone wrong, a Hendrix or Prince guitar wail. Am I dating myself? So what? Ageism is the curse of our young and puritanical era. This is also a book about the West and the East, how we stubbornly insist on capitalizing those two ever-oppositional domains. The West in decline, the East on the rise. I'm happy to live in a region of the world on the rise. There is so much more opportunity here, if you have the capital, or the investors, plus the vision, a work ethic, and an instinct for knowing how to get things done. There is also dire need here. The most basic standards of living are assumed to be the norm. The not huddled but bustling masses gather around Mumbai high-rises like mucher ants encircling termite citadels, such as that of Ambani's Attilia. Meanwhile, the West crumbles from its own stupidity and well-orchestrated postmodernist communist subversion. Most Americans fail to even realize this, even as they shop at convenience stores encased in bulletproof glass, chained, locked, all while being looked upon by frowning, ever-depressive clerks. All pervasive security cameras are so much more vigilant, like China's, but without the strict consequences. Many are just for show, fake, like so much in America. Maybe I should howl, but howling is so weak, so self-indulgent, accusing and deprecating at once. Maybe I should carefully explain, but careful explanations are so damn boring, and no one really cares. Maybe I should just write out a list like an attorney for the defense. Yes, my client pleads guilty. Yes, there were mitigating circumstances. Yes, he was an alien at times, an illegal one, even a refugee of sorts if you take all into consideration. Yes, he did harm. No, he did not intend harm. The prosecutor's witnesses have ulterior motives. Their accusations of harm are overinflated, if not outright fabricated. Yes, he has told a few basic untruths. No, he did not do so maliciously. He has been quoted out of context. He has had words put in his mouth. He has been social media mobbed. He has suffered financial loss through the false and misleading accusations. He has not been given a fair trial in the press nor in social media. He has not brought lawsuit, as such things are difficult to litigate and even more difficult for a jury to understand. He has lost his heart, his moral courage, his desire to create. He has become bitter. He has become conservative. Not that that is his natural disposition, but he feels left with no alternative. Violent thoughts enter his mind. He thinks of suicide. He thinks of his loved ones. He thinks of the people who love him deeply. He thinks of the people who need him and their families. He feels paralyzed and does nothing. He is white. Did I ever tell you about that time, long ago, when I first arrived in India, having flown in from Hong Kong? It was the old, shabby New Delhi airport. My very first memory is of a sari-clad Indian woman being afraid to get on the escalator that led to the baggage claim. She hesitated so much that her bags, 2 giant striped vinyl bags, as one would bargain for in an Indian bazaar, tied with bits of cloth and twine, all carefully knotted together, fell from her grip, tumbled like fat, colorful, misshapen balloons until they split wide open at the bottom. This was during the same time that one had to take a bus from the international terminal to the actual baggage claim. Why we had to do this, I have no idea. The bus was bizarrely odd for an American first arriving in India. The fluorescent lights seemed all different shades of dirty yellow and green, and they flickered like each of the many bounces in the uneven pavement. The seats were all slashed and torn, with a yellow cotton-like substance popping up in tufts. I remember telling friends back home in Wisconsin it was like a bus left over from 1950s Moscow. It just might have been. Just earlier this year, decades away from that first early experience, in a new, modern, sophisticated India, I was greeted at my incoming flight by what I swear was the same bus at the Mumbai International Airport, one of the most beautiful airports in the world. India has magnificently changed, but somehow that ghost of a bus, patched with duct tape, returned to my life like an apparition from a time still stitched like a patch onto my heart. Chapter 2. The Indian Moderns. So I promised this book would jump around, like my nicotine-infected thoughts. Here's a jump. India must finally get over its obsession with the progressives, specifically M.F. Hussain and F.N. Souza. They still hold sway over every major art auction in India. Why? Are they historical? Yes. Were they innovative and groundbreaking? In the case of Hussain, yes, but only in his mastery of self-promotion and ability to manipulate the Indian imagination. India finally had its own Picasso, but did it need one? The similarities are painful to observe, and each and every time Picasso comes out the winner, and not merely by the length of a horse's nose. I'm not at all saying that Hussain was not brilliant. He was, but his brilliance came decades after Picasso had already beaten that dusty path, and his efforts never achieved anything similar to the same power. I met Hussain 3 times, if one can even consider them meetings. Rather, I bumped into him. First as a barefoot guru, white hair caught in the breeze, briskly walking down near an Irani's tea stall. Once a surprise encounter when I poked my nose into Pundol's art gallery near Flora Fountain. He was busy chatting business at the desk, and I didn't have the guts to disturb him, much less introduce myself. Then once outside the entrance to the Jahangir Art Gallery, where I caught a glimpse of him being hastily ushered into a waiting limousine as flashbulbs blinded the crowd, including me. I regret not having spoken to him at Pundol's. I'm sure he was a kind man and would have happily given me a moment of his time. The gallerist, on the other hand, had given me a bit of a scowl. I was still new to India and its art scene. I looked like a hippie and wore chapels. Fear conquered the day. Hussain had an aura created by worshipful media and page 3 celebrity hunters. I like Hussain's paintings, at least many of them, especially from the early years. I remember an exhibition devoted to him at the NGMA, and the early work seemed so infused with skill and passion and an urgent need to express something. Like all of the progressives, Hussein wanted to change the direction of Indian art. No, they argued, Indian art does not have to be tied to Indian painting traditions. Indian art can learn from the West and even the Far East. Indian art can make the West the East in its own special way. They were so absolutely correct. It's a pity what fame does to an artist, however, and how gallery systems and collector demands bend the creative will to templates of style. Horses, horses, horses. I can hear Patti Smith singing. Suddenly, Johnny gets the feeling he's surrounded by horses, horses, horses. Listen, Patti Smith is singing this. Johnny is being pushed against a school locker, his head banging against a metal wall, and the implication is that he is being orally fucked by a bully. Bullies they are. And so, with Hussein, we have the tear of Guernica turned into a simple, marketable motif. This is not art, but it buys you a Rolls Royce, and perhaps avoids the mobs that attack you for your more serious, mythological paintings. I feel sorry for Hussein. He was fucked, but he also fucked himself. Am I fucking myself right now? Have I lost you, dear reader? It is not my place to speak so bluntly, especially being a Gora Ferengi, not even a proper Gora Sahib. Well, I've reached the age where I no longer care. This is a book filled with white truths, white lived experience, as the current lingo will have it. I shall attempt a redemption with Sousa, my favorite among the progressives, with the possible exception of Gaitonde. Sousa's anger and torment seems real enough, though he is perhaps the easiest to fake. There are far too many Sousas on the market, especially those horrid pen and pencil sketches on A4 paper, and everyone knows it. They fill the cheaper auctions. There is skepticism about the value and authenticity of those works, even if it isn't spoken out loud, and certainly not in polite company. Well, there is currently too much politeness in this world in all the wrong places, and an excess of politeness where screaming rudeness is needed to shake what has become an entrenched establishment. I'll play John the Baptist, odd crank that I am. Excuse me, my dear Hindu friends, for the Christian references, but it is the culture I was brought up with. Sousa was born in Goa, in Salagao. He was of Portuguese descent in pre-independence India, born of Catholic parents and oddly described in Wikipedia as, quote, an Indian-American British Asian artist, unquote. Where does the American creep in? Because he spent years living in New York? Further down, Wiki proclaims Portuguese, then British. But he was Indian, was he not? He ate yummy chutneys on warm parathas, spoke Konkani, gobbled mango pickle with his fingers, sipped sweet tea, waited for the fresh warm pow that merchant bicyclist vendors peddled through the humid, lazy morning streets under the still rain-sprinkled palms. I imagine he did. His skin looked particularly brown. He was far from white. He drew obscene scribbles on the walls of his college, St. Xavier, and later was expelled from the J.J. School of Art when the city was still called Bombay. He had pulled down and trampled his feet upon the Union Jack. He joined the Quit India movement and became a communist. None of this sounds white to me, at least not for those times. How did he ever end up being Portuguese, then British? It is as if Wikipedia has stripped his Indianness away from him, instead concentrating upon his Catholicism, a religion he seemed to both passionately hate and also irredeemably attached to. Odd what historians do, and wiki writers in particular. Worse, wiki entries change at the whim of its multitudinous editors, but then doesn't all history? So I look at Sousa's work. which is what anyone who truly seeks to understand art must do. His work is hauntingly unique. There is no easy comparison to be made to European modernists. Sousa is not Picasso, nor is he art brut. His works are nearly always infused with a passionate anger, a nightmarish scream, an anguish that struggles to articulate itself but remains choked back by forces beyond the protagonist's control. A beard juts forth like hypodermic needles jabbed inward. Eyes hold inexpressible grief, violent and barely contained. Saint Sebastian's arrows always aim for the neck, not of the saint, but of the black-frocked priests who are portrayed like demons. Darth Vader comes to mind, the evil, dominating, sadistic, and ever-controlling father. Yes, Sousa could be as repetitious as Hussein, but it never seemed that he is only going through the motions to satisfy a gallery that caters to vapid high society women. We see that in Hussein. We do not see that in Sousa. His pencil and inks on A4 paper, doodles, random ideas quickly jotted down. Do the poor guy a favor and fill a trash can and set most of them alight? How was he ever coerced into signing these? Do I speak of things I know nothing of? I am white. Apparently, according to Wiki, so was Sousa. I still feel on semi-safe ground. Have I gotten carried away again? Perhaps. Chapter 3. The Peacock. I'm withdrawing from nicotine. It's been 4 days of no smokes. That affects your mind. The chubby peacock that struts the wooded hill behind my cottage's back clear glass door is not aware. He pecks, peacock mutters, and scratches. When he does this during the rains, I so want to sit under the eaves in the old colonial swing-arm chair, light up a ciggy, and just take in the magic of my surroundings. Now, though, this magic must come to me without the aid of a puffed white smoke. Smoke white. I must remember that tribes of Native Americans gifted the world this magic, and cancer. Immediately a fight in my brain ensues. I tell myself, brown people use tobacco as medicines and rituals. It is the white man who enslaved Africans to run tobacco plantations, and white corporations that profited on the toxicity of overconsumption. Truth and falsehood there. People are people. We find ways to addict ourselves to pleasures all on our own. Don't tell me you've never heard or met of a sadhu addicted to ganja or bong. No white European urged him toward this. Look at the vintage miniatures. The same ganja guru is there. One of my favorite art critics in India these days is Johnny M.L. He generally speaks and writes the truth, though even he can be flexed to one direction or another, not by sycophantic manipulators, but by old friendships he is reluctant to lose. Such is true of most older art critics. Friends are, after all, friends. Johnny does cover their ground well, though. His vision miraculously extends beyond Kolaba, South Delhi, and Gurgaon, a seemingly unbelievable feat for most Indian art critics. It extends beyond the weary Bengali tastemakers. His eyes remain open to the youngest of talents, the most geographically marginalized, the artist whose main failing is a lack of communication and the exalted proper English idioms that still predominate Indian art discourse. And in spite of taking his degree at the notoriously woke Goldsmiths, he manages to keep his postmodern tendencies in check, even approaching them critically. Nothing, after all, cannot be deconstructed, including deconstruction as critical eye itself. But we artists ought not to write too much, should we? It is not our craft. Supposedly our gift is the expression of things inexpressible by words. Or is that a quaint concept from eras gone by? Take a look at Documenta. Take a look at the text-burdened walls of the Kochi Biennale. Take a look at the volumes upon volumes of gibberish texts that are cranked out to give mediocre work so-called meaning. Take a look at Rock's Media Collective. Oh dear, I do love Monica Nerula, but concepts are not art unless they lead to word-inexpressible visual stimuli. Otherwise, they become concrete poems, words frozen in colored acrylic boxes. I own one of these. We can argue about that over cocktails, but this is a definition that I live by. Our exhibitions have become too word-heavy. Here I speak not just about Indian art, but global art. Messages have become like Soviet propaganda posters, minus the powerful and exquisitely drawn graphics. The poetry of art has been ground into dust, perhaps diamond dust to sprinkle over some quirky new homilies, screen-printed with fervicol upon a sheet of dye-bond. Tracy Emin makes ghastly paintings and drawings, but has the gall to accost us with simpleton, deep thoughts in blazing, scribbled neon pink. She once exhibited her bed, her best work. In it, she expressed the true condition of her life and the tactics with which she planned her rise to fame and modest fortune. So text is everywhere. Don't we see enough of it on our phones? And then the catalogs, the ponderous wall text, the ever-so-serious pamphlets. Spare us, please. Let us look at the art. Let us hear the visual speech of someone with a story to tell. A real story, not a concocted, this will fit the narrative one. Today the peacock came to the glass doors that look out into the forest, and he looked in. He was more than gazing at his own reflection. It was a survey of my retreat's interior. 2 young puppies came by also, while I sat outside cheating with a cigarette, young and frisky, interested in only face-licking and hoping to be fed. But I had nothing for them, unless you consider a bag of sugar food. I've rearranged the furniture here. A desk that was against a dull wall now faces the skylights of the open living room. Behind me is the kitchen, 1 bowl with a few eggs, an empty packet of butter, some stale bread that I've just tossed outside in hopes the peacock returns. The new arrangement suits my writing better now. One must be comfortable in order to write. Wait. Let's analyze what I've just written above. One must be comfortable. Ah, but Jean Genet wrote within a prison cell. Jack Kerouac famously typed while on the road. Jean-Paul Marat famously penned lines during his many medicinal baths. The anti-elitist revolutionary was afflicted with skin inflammations, and he was stabbed to death therein. See the painting by Jacques-Louis David. Alexander Solzhenitsyn famously wrote his great exposé of the cruelties of the communist state from the Gulag. Oscar Wilde also wrote from prison, though he was refused the ability to write poetry or prose, being convicted as a man of immoral character. He was allowed to pen letters to friends, and these could be as long as novels, if he chose. Wilfred Owens, shell-shocked in the trenches of World War I, alliterated his powerful poems from a war hospital in Scotland. Frida Kahlo was not much of a writer, but her miraculously surreal and personal paintings she struggled to paint, ever in pain, from wheelchairs and crutches, and even in bed. What a bourgeois, unaware thing to write. One must be somewhat comfortable in order to write. Oh, really? But I bet you, my dear reader, glossed over those words, taking them at face value, within the comfy and exotic context they snuggled within. Such is the trickery of words. Shall we continue to analyze the paragraph in question? Let us return to the Peacock and his look through the swinging glass doors. He is looking both within, but also at his own reflection. It is possible to focus on one or the other, but more likely the two get jumbled in our fellow's vision, just as an interior and an exterior reflection would jumble in our own. The Peacock is seeing both, a strangely exotic environment, to him, that includes objects he would not understand, as they are outside of the natural world. Yet laid on top he sees the trees of his forest, trees that he is immensely familiar with. Their nebulous, floating, ephemeral appearance must mystify him, even though he understands exactly what they are. And he sees himself, perhaps not for the first time, but for the first time in this full frontal view, his image mingling with two worlds and disappearing into each. The Peacock is a connoisseur, or at least he is fascinated enough to be one. The image he sees is his version of art, exterior, interior, reflecting both reality and fantasy, a place he oddly discovers within himself. Is he enlightened? He gazes long enough with many cockings and swivels of the head, and it is easy to imagine he might be realizing something he hadn't previously comprehended. An epiphany of sort, yet something he never could gobble or coo to another, something he'd never think to claw in the sand. He takes it as it is. The two puppies, on the other hand, never took a moment to glance into the magic glass. They craved only comforting, easy love, a stroke on the back, and food. They are Philistines, or your average gallery museum goer. I learned over tea with Mary Storm in the grand hall of Sri Mathie's historic first structure that my peacock's name is Narcissus. Fitting that, his plumage speaks of eons of evolutionary development to court a worthy mate. Perhaps he is an artist, and as we all know, artists are rarely without self-preening, perhaps not of the physical variety, but of the social variety. Mary says he received his name exactly due to his proclivity to gaze into pools and windows. Reflections must fascinate him. He is aware of his own beauty, a beauty that holds him down with a weight that makes it nearly impossible for him to fly. Beauty is like that. It is a blessing and a curse. One can use beauty to beguile, as many artists do with their paintings, but that same beauty soon becomes thought of as the superficial meaninglessness of vanity. One can astound with beauty, like the beauty of Narcissus's fully fanned tail. Women might swoon for it. Men might like to imitate it. But beauty is such an easy target. The dreamy and layered reflections of the glass doors hold more meaning, but most fail to see them. At least our peacock Narcissus has an inkling of what he lacks. Chapter 4. At the Feet of Ravana. It's odd that I'm writing this at Sri Mathie's Forrest House, far away from my beloved home in my beloved Udaipur, but also in the land of Ravana, the mythological anti-hero who steals Sita and thus causes a years-long battle between the forces of Ram, loosely the north, and Sri Lankan's kingdom of Ravana, the deepest of the Hindustan south. I feel I type on enemy territory, but it is now, of course, a totally different country, ruled by the Sinhalese in the south of the island, and populated by long-ago migrant Tamil Indians in the north. Jaffna being the citadel of the North Island. Since an act of the government in 1955, Tamil is no longer an official language here. Hinduism suffers, but holds on. The Buddhist majority holds sway in most of the country, and especially the capital, Colombo. The language-religion divide is, of course, what precipitated the long inter-island civil war. Read Anil's Ghost by Michael Ondaatje. Things have settled down since then, though on my first trip, the military skirmishes were still common in the jungles. Much has returned to normal, but still, to many in India, this is the kingdom of Ravan, and I write from here, a geography traditionally associated with rebellion and rivalry. Perhaps this is what is giving this book its confrontational tone. The gods know my allegiance will always be to India, Bharat, Hindustan, but perhaps this gives me the distance to turn a more critical eye toward my adopted homeland. Here I am a hermit outlier. Remember, Rama sat at the feet of the fallen Ravan to gain knowledge from him. I think of myself as a North Indian, if I can appropriate that identity. The South has always seemed stranger to me, less spiritual and more secular, yet much quirkier in their rituals. And despite their loudly proclaimed hatred of Northern religiosity, their own religiosity, be it Hindu or Muslim or communist, seems far more stubborn, inflexible, even violent. It is not uncommon to hear South Indians mutter of civil war in the chai stalls, or proclaim that separate nations are the only solution. I do not hear this in the North, perhaps only because it is felt that the North currently holds the better cards. So I am an American North Indian by heart. My more conservative views on the way society ought to be structured, the importance I give to tradition, family, and inherited knowledge perhaps accounts for this, and my belief that geographies belong to cultures and the people who have traditionally held them. I won't swear allegiance to any current leader or government, as none inspire me in such a way. I seldom speak of Indian politics, but since this is, at least partially, a book of confessions, I might as well take the risk of writing the truth. That, the unspeakable said, let me buffer it with some praise of Kerala. Once I had dreamt of setting up my studio in Kerala. Back in 2001, 2002, it was obviously already the happening place for new and exciting Indian art. What is more, a skill level and an aesthetic eye existed in the state that I'd yet to discover elsewhere. Painting had a long tradition in Kerala, from the magnificent frescoes of its palaces and temples, invariably overwhelming the eye with both detail and the colors orange and green. A good rule of thumb is that gods and goddesses are painted green in South India, while they are blue in the north. Then, of course, the much-sung legend of Sri Raja Ravi Varma, an artist born in the area formerly known as Travancore, but now known as Tiruvananthapuram. He famously found patronage under the Maharaja Elyam Thirunal, and the British administrator Edgar Thurston played a significant role in promoting his work, as did, for a time, the Maharaja Gaikwad of Baroda, and the British regent Sir T. Madhavrao in Gujarat. Thus, Varma, the Keralan, became India's first contemporary artist to win a national reputation. A consummate entrepreneur, Varma hired two German brothers to help him set up lithography studios in both Secunderabad and Bombay, and soon his oleographic reproductions of his stylistically Europeanized and romanticized paintings that updated popular Indian religious tales filled middle-class homes from Calcutta to Jaipur. Varma became India's first truly contemporary artist, both in learning how to appeal to the masses and how to produce enough quantity to appease ever-awaiting clients. He updated tastes while still maintaining an astounding level of skill. I often think that the level of superior artistic skills that stem from Kerala is a result of the College of Fine Art Trivandrum, Thiruvananthapuram. Unlike the much vaunted Faculty of Fine Art, MSU Vadodara, formerly known as Baroda, the Kerala College still maintains an old-fashioned emphasis on skill development, especially draftsmanship, composition, color theory, and the intricacies of paint mixing and brushwork. Baroda, on the other hand, has lost much of its once top-grade faculty and allows its students to wander rather aimlessly between stylistic and conceptual explorations. The best of its faculty are retired or semi-retired, and little supervision is afforded students other than that of the occasional lecture and slideshow, lists of required materials, brief demonstrations, and then what amounts to a give-it-a-try atmosphere. This is not to say that good artists do not still emerge from Baroda, but when they do, one has the feeling that they have been self-motivated enough to basically teach themselves. Faculty members tend to reward those who most approximate their own approach to art, especially on the conceptual level. For all Kerala's communist allegiances, its students seem far more imaginative and willing to explore new boundaries, having been given the strict lessons in basic technique to make exploration possible. You can see this skill and solid exploration in the works of Zakir Hussain, Gopi Krishna, Dibin Talekan, N. Ribson, Mibin, Anju Acharya, Hima Haryana, Pradeep Kumar K.P., T.P. Premji, Sanam C. Narayan, and the late Rajan Krishnan. The photographer Abu Kalam Azad. This list could go on for pages. There is still an energy in Kerala, even if its vanguard status is slightly tarnished with both familiarity and new competition. I often wonder why collectors at auctions have not snapped up much of this work, still incredibly cheap in comparison to the progressives. The writing is often there, the mandatory text, but it is often in Malayalam. There are certainly legends to be told about so many Kerala artists. Why has it not been recorded, and why has it not been repeated with the nauseous predictability of the Bombay progressives, the Bengali masters, and the clique that constitutes the New Delhi scene? That said, we ought to make mention of two of the best-known Kerala artists of our time, A. Ramachandran and K.G. Subramanian. Ramachandran was born in Antagal. After taking a master's degree in Malayalam literature, the young man who had first imagined he would be a writer found himself shifting to Kalabhavan, Shantiniketan, where he enjoyed the rare tutelage of luminaries of the visual arts, Ram Kinkar Bej, Binod Bihari Mukherjee. I once owned a small etching by Ramachandran dated 1968, just shortly after the artist had left the idyllic shade of Shantiniketan for the dusty, humid streets of Mumbai. The etching was always one of my favorites, small as it was. On both the left and the right, anguished bodies were seen squeezed and contorted, faceless, yet still able to hold their fists in the air. In the middle, what seems an immorally wide pathway leads to a distant mountain. Tall concrete walls hold back the masses from this passage. It's a young communist sort of composition, yet so well executed that it transcends the political and becomes a comment on the universal struggles of humanity itself. Today it rests with the archives of the Stanley Museum of Art in Iowa City, USA. Much of Ramachandran's early work was like that, powerful, universal, and filled with pathos. It is what made him a great artist. But times changed, and so did Ramachandran. I'm told he made many visits to Udaipur, my adopted home, for quiet retreats to ponder and paint. The Carolyn Temple greens and oranges that predominated his early work gave way to soft pastel blues, deep indigos, powdery pinks and yellows. The Udaipurian miniature painting influence could not help but be noticed. I'm told by my friends Bhupesh and Tanuja Kavdia, who run Bougainvillea Art Gallery, that his visits have become less frequent, but he does still appear, generally quietly, and with next to no fanfare. These days he tends to paint maidens among the foliage, or just the wondrous forms of the kamal, lotus flower, a plant so magically graceful from tiny bud to full bloom, their long stems bending with the rhythms of the waters. My former collaborator and I once made a homage to one of Ramachandran's lotus compositions. We called it In the Land of Lotus Fantasy, and first exhibited it in Kochi at the large space Kashi Art Gallery kept in Mattencherry when it was still run by my friend Anup Skaria and his wife Dory Younger. Maybe it was a kind of rip-off, but we both so loved Ramachandran's painting, and it seemed the perfect place to set me and my partner Tommy and a young Indian boy. A fantasy it was. I do hope Ramachandran appreciated it. Today it hangs in a home in Amsterdam. Chapter 5, Pooling. The Peacock Narcissus has returned to my door, but is acting as if he is vexed that the Forrest House Picture Museum hasn't changed its show. The Peacock Cafe out front has only a bowl of stale milk, left over from last night's cat, and a few chunks of soggy, stale bread quickly molding in this humidity. Narcissus shakes his tail at me, as if in a peeved rebuff. I have forgotten him. One must never forget the connoisseurs, and especially ones named Narcissus. But it's time for tea with Mary in the main house. So, after tea, I ended up easing myself carefully into the pool. Despite the week of cloudy skies and sporadic rains, the water actually turned out to be rather warm. Mary's pool is long and thin, built for the laps that she still does, even at her age. 23 laps per day, which is amazing when you consider how long the pool is. She's been a great host, with breakfast at the main house each morning, afternoon tea either in her office or poolside, and a casual yet elegantly served dinner each evening at 7:30. We seem to all prefer skipping lunch. Mary was, self-admittedly, born with a silver spoon in her mouth. She was educated at Stanford and elsewhere and carries herself like the properly erudite academic that she is. She keeps a cluttered office and a tidy library. We often disagree politically, but civilly, which is so rare these days. Her food is the absolute best. She has also studied at Lake Cordon Bleu in Paris. Yet she can stir up some scrumptious Indian paneer with vegetables and the most subtly spiced of sauces. I've yet to get fully through her best-known book, Head and Heart, Valor and Self-Sacrifice in the Art of India. But each time I get back to it, I learn new things, or see things from a different perspective. It is an appropriate book to read in these days when masculinity is so often equated with toxicity and valor only equated with men, or entirely stripped from them. I have not forgotten K.G. Subramanian. He was born in Kuthaparamba, again Kerala, to a Tamil Brahmin family in 1924. A fervid ideological Gandhian, he found himself imprisoned for protests during the freedom struggle and was later imprisoned by the British overlords, who even forbade him from attending government colleges upon his release. Like Ramachandran, he too found refuge at Tagore's Shantiniketan, where he studied within the Kala Bhavan, taking lessons from even those as notable as Nandalal Bose. The fact that KG studied at Kala Bhavan is noteworthy when you think that toward the end of his life, he came to repaint those striking black and white murals he had begun painting on Kala Bhavan in 1990 and 1993. This time over 2 months in the winter of 2009. Subramanian overpainted everything and completed it. Subramanian, I, like many others, tend to simply call him KG, was a prolific painter. Drawings, ink on paper, in a suggestive, notational Japanese style, watercolors, gouaches, and of course, oil on canvas. I admire his oeuvre immensely. There is a genius eye behind every line, every dab of the brush. He developed a very recognizable style, but as a rule it is not tediously repetitive, as one could say of Hussein. It is semi-primitive in nature, but I would not say influenced by the movement of art brut. Subramanian's many writings make it clear that he wished to develop a modernist art that seems to arise naturally from the folk arts of the subcontinent. His art evolved slowly, passing through terracotta tableau, masterworks such as Studio Table with Figure, 1965, now in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York, or View from the Balcony, 1989, now in the collection of the Peabody Essex Museum. And then his experimentations with what the Germans called Hinterglasmalerei, that is, reverse painting on glass, though Subramanian himself used acrylic sheet. He was an endlessly tireless writer. Of his 6 books, his last, The Magic of Making, is perhaps my favorite, as it seems to sum up his career and approach to art with a dynamic lucidity. I am involved in the magic of making right now, here in this Sri Lankan Forrest House. This book, which I'm struggling away at between bouts of nicotine withdrawal and cheating with cigarettes, is not coming easy to me. Unlike the last book, Karkhana, which was all in my head and only took 10 days to transfer to a written file, this writing is aimless, sometimes passionate, sometimes methodical, at times angry, though I've tried to conceal the last of these 3. There are the interruptions of breakfast, rather socially mandatory tea with my hosts each day at 4 p.m., a guilty but refreshing evening dip in the pool, and of course Mary's superbly cooked dinners. Last night we had one of my favorites, one I'm much familiar with from Thailand, prawn and pomelo salad with a side of fresh tuna sashimi. After dinner, I convinced my host to watch the movie The Menu, one of my favorite cult films, on the TV in their library. Mary seemed to love it. She laughed out loud, at times, gasped. Guy, on the other hand, was more stoic in his viewing. It seemed a fitting film somehow, but please don't read too much into that. It was just good fun. My days are also punctuated with a plethora of WhatsApp messages from the artist working hard back in Udaipur. Chirag wants me to see a drawing before he begins to paint. I tell him to adjust the size due to the proportion and suggest a change of gesture in the figure. Dalpat messages with an image of a large new painting. I so hate the word miniature, but what else can supplant it? Our work comes from that tradition. I tell Dalpat it looks subse sundar, and he is happy. But then I must point out that certain birds and plants need to be a bit smaller near the horizon. I change my mind and ask him to add one more white ibis, aloft in Shankar's intricate gold sky. We talk about how the reeds and lotuses will be placed, and in this particular painting, we debate the ideal turtle that will form a sort of centerpiece to the composition. There's a lot of exchange of Googled images and hasty drawings, mine exceedingly primitive, Dalpat's much more refined. Will there be gold in the turtle's shell? I tell him we should complete it and decide then. I remind him that his brother, Bunty, has digital prints he must make half-inch torn gold borders upon, then cover those borders with gold leaf. These will be for our annual Diwali sale. Dalpat reminds me that he has given 4 new cups of gold to Shankar, and he needs them to complete the large project I've asked him to work upon. Then Chirag messages again. He has revamped his drawing and it looks good. I give him the go-ahead to start painting. And then I remember that I must pay an electric bill in Udaipur via Paytm. I remember a past due bill from my frame maker, one larger than I had expected, so I immediately make the money transfer. I like to know just where I stand and not live on false illusions. My longtime friend and assistant Ganpat is in Colombo, and he sends a photo of his newly arrived train tickets that will take him to Kandy. I'm so happy he convinced me to bring him here for 9 days. He is touring to see Sigiriya Rock and the Dambula cave paintings. I fear the artists are jealous, but I've explained to them that Ganpat, though he's been with me almost from the beginning, does not earn the money or get the bonuses that they do. The treats of occasional travel are his bonuses, one of the perks for his 18 years of friendship and loyalty. By evening, just after my swim, my phone becomes hyperactive. Each of the artists is showing me his accomplishments for the day. It all looks great. I'm proud of my team. More than proud. Without them, I could not indulge in this magic of making. Today is Mary Storm's birthday, the 13th of September, 2023. We saw each other briefly this morning, just after I had concluded my breakfast of cheese omelet with toast and raspberry jam. She was sitting in the great hall having a very long birthday chat with one of her academic artist friends, a woman who lives in California. Just before she ended the video call, she brought the tablet over to me so that we could be introduced. I asked a few questions and mentioned that my home was in Udaipur, Rajasthan. I was surprised that she reacted as if she had heard of me. That's always a great feeling for an artist, that brief happiness of being recognized. We said our goodbyes, and I immediately broke out into a slow, melodic rendition of Happy Birthday, Just for Mary. It was emotion-laden. We both just lost our mutual friend, Kavita Singh. As we get older, birthday songs become less joyous and more tender, sentimental, and, dare I write it, foreboding. I can sing the song that I sang to Mary as I sang it to Mary. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Mary. Happy birthday to you. Of course I sing out of tune, but it's the feeling that counts. Tonight, Guy will be taking Mary for a romantic oceanside dinner at some secret sushi place that they both treasure. It's endearing, but it also leaves me alone tonight, with more time to write and eggs to scramble up for dinner in my frying pan. Today I am back to the magic of making. We all are. That is, the team and me. First thing this morning, Chirag announced that he had finished all of the painting work for the Pinkerton lithographic landscape series we were working on. This series next moves to Dalpat. We'll be adding small touches of miniature-style greenery and flowers in just the perfect places on the landscapes. Dalpat reminds me that Chirag now needs to do figures in a large painting that he finished some days ago. I message Chirag and tell him to forget another project that we were about to embark upon and to instead do as Dalpat suggests. It makes sense, though Chirag, being the youngest and bright as a star, is sometimes not so keen on taking orders from the older Dalpat, though he acknowledges that Dalpat is a master. More times the work orders must come directly from me. Partially this just avoids confusion, and I'm thankful to be in control and know what each member of the team is spending their time and efforts upon. We have deadlines. The large suite of 15 Pinkerton landscape prints that we are making interventions upon is promised for an exhibition curated by Premji Shachari and will show at the prestigious Bikaner House in New Delhi in a 3-row grid. Bhavna, director and owner of Latitude 28, messages to say that she thinks these would do well in Mumbai, but I remind her they are promised to Premjish's landscape show. We would have no time to make something different at this late point in time. Meanwhile, I think Bunty is finishing up the sample digital prints, but will then return to painstakingly placing gold leaf over terracotta pots. These gold leaf vessels will be a part of an installation that we're planning for Gallery Isa in Mumbai in exactly 1 year. Shamlal Kumar is an outsider to our team, but he has been involved in several projects of ours. A traditional village potter, the surname Kumar itself identifies a person from the potter caste or someone who works with clay. Shamlal lives in the small village of Moella, a village known for its many terracotta craftsmen. Few women work at this job here. It seems reserved for men, yet mothers and sisters can often be seen assisting in the more mundane tasks of pottery making. Mostly, the village produces small tableaux of Hindu gods for display in local and family shrines. I have been to Shamlal's when over 50 village elders are gathered within his sunny courtyard, just near the pottery kiln, to purchase, order, haggle, and discuss the religious tableaus that they need. It is marvelous to see with one's own eyes how this tradition continues and survives. Other than the religious tableau, all of Moella's clay craftsmen, I really hate calling them potters when the majority of their work is so much more than functional, create tableau of village life. A man plowing a field, a group of plump and happy cows, the wheat being gathered into sheaves, women grinding wheat and corn flour, chapati making, women with newborn children. The list is really endless. They are in ways the same sort of pictorial genre scenes I once tried to creatively produce with my Rolleiflex and sepia prints. Here they exist in brown clay, later drying to a gray color, and once fired they turned the traditional terracotta orange. Shamla also works on three-dimensional objects for sale to the very occasional passing tourist, such as a mother dog stretched out for her eager suckling pups, a huge freestanding rendition of Sri Mathie, the revered Krishna deity that is worshipped in the nearby pilgrimage town of Nathdwara, and a large village farmer holding his young son upon his shoulders. On each visit we survey all of these works, buying one or two and perhaps commissioning some for ourselves. I speak of we as Ganpat and I, as it is without fail that is he that makes the 2-hour drive to the village. We like to go early in the morning, leaving just after 9 a.m. Inevitably, we will stop for chai, and I will crave a bag of plain salted potato chips, will smoke a beedi at the chai stall, and perhaps indulge in a few cigarettes as the car winds down the country roads, our arms hanging carefree out of the open windows. Our old Mahindra Thar was lost to an accident. These days we drive a more modest but functional white Tata Nexon. But it is a happy car, and we've taken many along in an adventurous ride in it. We will stop somewhere near a large stand of bamboo and make peace up. All of this has become ritual by now. This last time at Shamlal's, we asked him to create a very few worm-like apsaras for us. They will be a part of a large installation in the fall of 2024. My ideas get across via silly scribbles I make with ballpoint pen, holding a wobbly notebook in my lap. I sit in a plastic chair in the middle of Shamlal's small showroom. I try to explain with words, and Ganpat translates, often, I suspect, adding a few of his own embellishments. Thus Shamlal works with us, as a commissioned craftsman of great skill and lineage. Is he a member of the team? I doubt that he would think so. Our visits are too infrequent, and we don't commission him that often. Yet he made wonderful sculptures for our show Sleeping Through the Museum that was shown at both Sakshi Art Gallery in Mumbai and later as an unofficial collateral event to the 2014 Kochi Biennale. He is like a friendly cousin who helps out when we need him. Visits to his workshop are always a delight, and Ganpad and I have our favorite dhaba to stop at for lunch upon our return to Udaipur. It's time to make a jump. I have just returned from a short tea and a long swim in the pouring Sri Lankan rain. The long pool, designed for laps and having a disappearing edge that overlooks a shallow dell in the jungle, is magical when splashing with drumming topical rain. Each fallen water droplet raises up a crown, and millions of these splash back, creating a shimmering explosion of cloudy, dark green. I could have stayed in this rain pool for hours, but instead climbed out to finish the last of the cooling pot of tea. As always, cinnamon toast had been sent along as a necessary accompaniment. Mary and Guy are in Galle. The Sri Lankan girls who make up most of the staff seem to think I have gone crazy for having gone swimming in the rain. They chatter and giggle, then finally remove the tea tray. They seem a good bunch. A few Mary has employed for years. But as for jumping, I dive into pools, where I will happily splash from one subject to another as the mood suits, and I will splash into other cultures with a childish glee. Cultural appropriation? I scoff at those words. Exploitation? My teammates will defend me as the true friends they are. The cooling rain swim has put me in a mild, devil-may-care mood. Narcissus has hidden away from the rain, but one prehistoric monitor lizard plods his way through the wet green near the chicken coop. Chapter 6. A Path Through the Jungle. I tend to still adhere to a linear history of Western art in the manner that Camille Paglia so fervently defends. This makes a sensible and comprehensible approach to the history of Western art, just as the chronological tracings of the history of Chinese or Japanese art does. Indian art is a bit more difficult to grasp in this manner, as it spans such a vast geographical area, which was for much of its history not so easy to communicate within. Indian art has its vast array of different cultures: Southern, Northern, Caroline, Tamil, Bengali, the list goes on. Hinduism binds, but the approaches to Hinduism have always been as diverse as the subcontinent itself. Mix in Jainism, Sikhism, Buddhism, Christianity, and the invasions of Islam, and you have quite the messy pot to stir, much less to arrange in a supposedly rational order. Then, of course, the colonizers. The British we all think of first, but also the French and the Dutch. It's a touchy subject, but also the Mughals. It has become a taboo in modern India to speak about the Mughal Empire as colonizers, yet they most definitely were. Since some 17% of native Indians are practicing Muslims, and Hindu-Muslim tensions often run high, we are not supposed to admit to what is a basic fact. That is such a sign of our fact-fearful times. We must live in a fantasy land, denying the reality of history in order to preserve diversity and social harmony, or so it is demanded of us. Getting back to the linear approach to Western art, Paglia argues that the history of Western art begins with ancient Greece, moves through the Roman Empire and its fall, hibernates in the dank castles and churches of medieval times, extends to the era of Christian Byzantium, and emerges again in Renaissance Europe. Of course, there are many detours along this path. The High Renaissance breaks into the Baroque, the Romantic, and then, skipping some years, the camera is invented by Daguerre and Niepce. Take your pick. Fox Talbot makes reproductions possible via paper negatives, and soon art suffers an existential crisis. Its supposed purpose, that is, reproducing reality in whatever means might be in vogue, is quickly and permanently destroyed. Once again, jumping quickly, we hop through the Impressionists, the Fauves, the Expressionists. Abstraction. Must we really debate between Kandinsky and Hilma af Klint? Surrealism, minimalism, abstract expressionism, the Ashcan school, etc., until we arrive at pop art and Andy Warhol. Paglia likes to end it at Mapplethorpe or Basquiat. I would say Basquiat. But then it is just all sort of over, isn't it? It falls apart, doesn't it? The problem is multifold. For one, the freedoms encouraged by all of these schools of art, not to mention the exploratory freedoms encouraged, even demanded in Western art schools, finally end any sense of linear continuity. Art becomes a splattering of ideas and styles, cast carelessly to a directionless wind. Mapplethorpe dies of AIDS, Basquiat from drug addiction suicide. I'm sure they could feel that an era was ending, dare I say, a civilization, and that the very string they themselves clung to, as the last thread of survival, was slipping from their hands. Postmodernism was rising, quickly. At first, many incorrectly assumed it was just an art movement, an after-modernism appellation being bandied about by art snobs. But its reality, deeply grounded in Gramscian communist theory, was far, far more carefully thought out, broader in scope than few in the 1980s could imagine, and more sinister in its objectives. Art suddenly became filled with new terms: constructed histories, the need to deconstruct histories, the need to confront the matter of authorship, the ensuing dialectic concerning, can we separate the art from the artist? More came pouring in. Concerns about Western art's seemingly patriarchal structure, most academics blissfully ignoring the same concerns in Japanese, Indian, Chinese, or indigenous societies, willing to paper over the patriarchal nature of those societies with reams of concocted gibberish. This tale, of course, goes on a while, until our present day. But let me make another jump. Let me go out on a limb and list a few artists I think are as forgettable as the chewing gum you spat out of your car window 10 years ago on that road trip from some forgotten place. Damien Hirst, Tracy Emin, Jeff Koons, Yayoi Kusama, Yoshitomo Nara, to begin with. Most of these are in some quasi-neo-pop vein, some, like Hirst, a quandary to classify, but all of his works can be found along a continuum between the junky and the meaningless, overly slick. Only Koons outdoes Hirst when it comes to being meaninglessly slick. I could write a chapter just disparaging that slimy used car salesman excuse for an artist. Tracy Emin defies categories because she's just predictably untalented and bad. The fact she even gets discussed as an artist is a sign of our crumbling and decadently corrupt times. Yet, present-day media will still fawn over these artists, giving them sincere interviews, mini-documentaries, the occasional publicity-driven scandal, and mostly just the forever and forever tedious mentions in print. Granted, this is mostly true in London and Tokyo and to some extent Los Angeles. New York seems to have risen above them, mostly. These artists are not postmodernists, nor are they true heirs to the once rebellious and interesting movement of pop. They are just capitalists doing what capitalists do. As most know, I tend to be extremely anti-communist. I am an American, after all, surprise. However, art, as is often said, is not supposed to be about making money. We artists need sales or grants to proceed with our creations, and every sale helps. But if you want to get rich, Try the commodities markets or invest in some scam call center in Nigeria. Art to me is sacred. It is not a commodity. I'm talking to you, Mr. Coons. Art must have a meaning. It must. Meaning, however, is a slippery word that is easily misunderstood or manipulated. Meaning in art was once closely guarded by the patrons of religious institutions and kingdoms, generally deeply intertwined. The popes and doges and princes, all along the watchtowers, held the view, as did the cardinals and archbishops too. The artists, dependent as they were upon royal patronage, just as the miniaturists in the Persian, Mughal, and Ottoman courts were, had to toe the line. Religious, mythological, and courtly traditions needed to be painted faithfully in a manner that would please the patron. Of course, some playfulness enters such courts of power and privilege, just as it always seems to do. An exotic animal or an exotic scene might be requested. It might be suggested that a portrait of an angel behind the Mother Mary bear a slight resemblance to the king's secret mistress, or that a rival prince be portrayed with a nose that was just a bit bulbous. But these minor follies were always at the discretion of the patron. If the artist made such daring moves upon their own, as a few did, they risked the wrath of the powerful, and perhaps not only the loss of their jobs, but the loss of their heads. It was the Renaissance and the rise of the merchant capitalist class that freed the artist. Patronage for artists now came into being that was not necessarily tied to the traditions of the past. An artist could go solo, break away from his guild, and find even just one wealthy landowner to bankroll his aesthetic whims. Traditions changed slowly at that time, and subject matter was often identical to that which the church or the princes might have asked for. But for the first time, an artist might find favor with a patron or patrons precisely because of his daring changes to the painting traditions. Da Vinci could introduce a scientific yet evocative realism. Michelangelo could dare to sculpt sexy, muscular angels. Caravaggio could introduce dramatic lighting, and Rembrandt could create a style out of a brownish, moody darkness. Capitalism freed art, not from patrons, but from an exclusive hold certain classes of patrons held over them for centuries. How sadly ironic that this led, eventually, to Koons and Hearst, whose patrons are no longer open-eyed peacock narcissuses, but cold, seemingly blind investment bankers, commodity brokers, Russian oligarchs, and Saudi princes. Have we come full circle? It is tragic. I must go back to my defense attorney's list. He has forgotten a major point. I am a capitalist, not in the sense that I hold vast portfolios of stocks, not even that I am particularly wealthy. In fact, many of my middle-class Indian friends seem to have more money than I. The term ideological capitalist suits me better. I believe in a classical liberal version of a free market, with only the most minor of controls in order to keep the markets ethical, and a generosity of progressive taxation that uses those funds collected to serve the public betterment and alleviate the worst of the sufferings among the poor. As a classical liberal, I see a free and broad public education as essential to the well-being of a free capitalist society itself. Education and lack of caste, class, or racial bias is what allows for a snakes and ladders version of society, where the high-born but foolish may lose it all, while the lowest may rise to the top. This ideology is based in the free will of the individual, not the overarching control of any self-appointed elite. Seeing this ideal liberalism, which could have been achieved, descend into vast bureaucracies of an overpaid managerial class that does little to actually address the problems of our society in a realistic fashion, but rather selfishly feeds itself with ever-growing programs and staffing, all the while mouthing diversity, equity, and inclusion platitudes, fills me with disgust and anger. But this is another rant in itself. So yes, I fall into the capitalist camp of Koons and Hearst and Warhol. Fortunately, I've managed to survive within that template, even grow, without bastardizing myself and the art. It can be done. I remain free to create as I choose, and my collaborators remain free to work within my team, our carcana, or not. So who are the new lordly keepers of the sacred canon? Outside the admittedly currently debased capitalist mode, we have the path many younger artists choose to follow. Residencies, artist camps, grants for doing studies and projects abroad, governmental awards, NGO grants, invitations to carefully curated, politically motivated shows. The youth adjust their artist statements to suit the new keepers of the faith of Gramscian postmodernism. Though that very movement has become so ingrained throughout our institutions that many who operate within its system are not aware or only vaguely aware of its premises and desired goals. The actual cognoscenti among the new kings and popes, the new archbishops, are keenly aware, and they guard their newly conquered fiefdoms as jealously as any medieval squire. These fiefdoms being the art institutions, academia at large, nearly every major art museum in the Western world, all biennales, the preponderance of critical anthologies and magazines, and much of the popular press. The rule books, the sacred texts of this coterie of international collaborators, in the espionage sense of the word, are as long or longer than the Bible, the Quran, and the Mahabharata combined. The thou shalt and thou shalt nots fill their philosophical pages, each elaborately constructed and then elaborately constructed again upon the previous impenetrable assumptions, with the same ineffable belief in prima facie reasoning and infallibility as any sincere priest, guru, or imam. Compared to these cultish zealots, an artist like the late M.F. Hussein suddenly seems totally admirable. Sousa indeed flirted with communism, which then, as now, always gives a sort of chic veneer to a struggling bohemian. So did Hussein, but it was told that, in private, Hussein whispered to gallerist and collector ears that he was a full-blown capitalist. Who could have guessed? But it is good that he was at least open about it in some circles and polite society. I do have immense respect for any artist that climbs a ladder in the manner that Hussein did. He did not come from a wealthy family. In fact, his family was poor. He trained as a sign painter, first brushing text only, and then the large Bollywood movie theater hoardings that were at the time always hand-painted. It is through this that he learned to paint quickly and with long, confident strokes. What was a necessity of his trade became a much-praised aspect of the genius that he held in his hands. His brushes, the real ones, not the prop he kept like a cane everywhere he went, were handled with long practiced eyes, coupled to amazingly dexterous shoulders, elbow, wrist, and hand. He was a showman, able to drum up such stunts as advertising the demonstration of painting a horse for the edification of his fans, only to bring out a very real white horse and paint upon its fur. Hussein was both trickster and a magician. We are all very fond of remembering the magic. He climbed the ladder with talent, wit, grace, social poise, and fun. Young Indian artists still have it better than those in the West, and I mean this sincerely. The very fact that the Indian art scene still needs to grow, mature, and refine means that the young artist has vast opportunities to move forward with that agenda. It may be tempting to move to New York, London, or Berlin, where one can always play the oppressed global South victim card, and in this day and age, that can get you pretty far. Many residency and grant applications are based on it. But it is in India itself where materials, physical, moral, philosophical, traditional, mythological, social, have yet to have even their surfaces explored with any depth. There are, of course, artists that have done that, a diverse range of them. J. Swaminathan, Talar L.N., Sabod Gupta, Bhupen Kakar, Ghulam Muhammad and Alima Sheikh, Abanindranath Tagore, and Jamini Roy, just to name a few. But the job is far from complete. What India so desperately needs are young artists not chasing the seductive monetary and exhibition approvals of the West, but young Indians shrewd and hard enough to forge an art scene in India, their home, that is so strong and vibrant that it cannot be ignored. If such a thing can be done, it is local desi collectors and institutions that ought to jump on board and help finance its growth. We've had stirrings of that with the Museum of Art and Photography, MAP in Bangalore, Sarmaya in Mumbai, and to some extent the Kiran Nader Museum of Art, though the latter only recently has broken away from the dictates of Western approval. We must be thankful for them all. They are trying. They are forging a path through the jungle. But youthful innovators must forge new paths also, new styles, new objectives, in other words, things that will be so extraordinary they cannot be unnoticed. Chapter 7, Interlude. Ganpat is currently on the chugging train that winds through the mountains from Kandy to Ella. From there, a taxi driver we know, Asanka, will pick him up and drive him the 3 hours from there to Sri Mathie. The train ride is absolutely gorgeous. I know, since Tommy and I did that route so many years ago. Tea and banana plantations, small lonely outposts of rail stations, tunnels and bridges and waterfalls, mountains and rivers, and seemingly never-ending greenery and jungle. Yesterday, Ganpat climbed to the top of Sigiriya, through the lion's claws and the elephant gate, up the steep, shaky, scary iron steps to reach the ancient step pool and breathe in the panoramic enormity of the kingdom of Ravan. In a video he made at the top, he called Sigiriya Ravana Mahal. This is partly fictional, or is it? I know that when you're there, surrounded by the vast Sri Lankan jungle, it is easy to imagine. Anyway, the car ride through the mountains from Ella to here is pretty awesome too. We expect him at Sri Mathie around 6 p.m., just in time for whiskey or Negronis, and then a late dinner. He's met a girl on the train that he is sitting with. I'm happy he has found a friend and some joyful company. Hopefully they will not end up in some beach shack together, but one never knows. No, Ganpat actually is much too loyal to his wife and 3 beautiful daughters. I expect him at 6. It'll be great to have him around for just a few days, but my writing will no doubt take a hiatus. Ganpat is gone, back now in Udaipur. More on his visit later. His little girl Nanu, now 8 years old, sends me a voice message. I've got a daddy. I've got a daddy. She's so happy that he has returned. It melts my heart. She is the most precious thing in the world. The entire family missed him. It is unnatural for Indians with families to travel alone for such extended periods of time. Ganpat was a needed break from writing, and a needed chance to get out and about. We were lucky enough to have blue skies that I swear he generally brings with him, along with his based, positive outlook on life. Ganpat likes to keep it simple. He has that inner sense of what is really important in life: good family, good friends, and keeping a smile in your heart that can be shared with others. I'll miss him, as I always do. He's much more than just an employee of mine. Chapter 8. White. This afternoon, just before a much-needed nap, Narcissus strutted in a perfect line, just a couple meters from where I sat upon the terrace, the little terrace that looks back into the woods. He paused about halfway on his parade-like strut, cocked his head toward me, tilted it curiously, then continued upon his parade. He did this twice, the first time walking to the right of my view, then making an about face and returning from whence he came. He never once looked at himself in the glass door. Perhaps his perplexed look at me was enough to get a sense of his own self. Perhaps he senses that I, too, am a Narcissus. His only reaction was to hold his head up, higher. It is Ganesh Chaturthi. I have tossed out the cigarettes. No more, for Ganesh's sake. I have made a vow. New doors must still open. I turned 70 years old in November. There are still things I want to do and people and families dependent upon me and my work. I must think now of cigarettes as stupidity rather than quick, sophisticated highs. Smoking is romantic. It was always sold to us like that in movies and magazines and novels. Smoking is contemplative. Is it, or does it just dull the senses enough to make the addict feel so? I must stop thinking of cigarettes as little rewards for minor accomplishments. Stop thinking of them as bonding with others, especially men. They are disgusting bringers of death. I hate seeing them in the ashtrays. I hate seeing the black ash and imagining the same thing in my lungs. I hate the little accumulated piles of useless, tar-stained filters. Mostly I disdain my own lack of willpower, my own acquiescence toward self-inflicted harm. I must resist the friendly offers to light up from friends and realize that a firm, "I don't smoke," sends a message they do good to ponder. It is over, Ganesh. I promise. I promise. I was writing about the way we work. I was writing about the Karkana. I was writing about meaning. How big of a Narcissus am I ask myself often. Am I really an artist? How many photographs do I really shoot at the studio each year? It seems it has become less and less. Are these works still mine after Dalpat has tinted and painted them? After Shankar has edged them with the golden webbing of a border? How dare I claim them? Have I become just a brand, no different from Dolce & Gabbana or Gucci? As for the miniatures, I do not add a single stroke other than my scrawl of a signature. I cannot properly wield a brush, yet I trumpet the necessity of skill. I cannot properly mix colors, though I know a good hue for an appropriate location when I see one. I cannot draw a well-balanced, eye-pleasing composition, yet I know how to visualize one, and then let someone else sketch it out for me. Even today itself, Chirag so improved upon one of my rough ideas, its beauty must be ascribed to him, not me. I say that I am the conceptualizer, and it is true. But aren't all patrons who conceptualize commissions for artisans to produce the same? Am I a patron, not an artist? Am I a middleman? Is this what I have become? I am sometimes accused of that, and I do sometimes wonder at my own arrogance. Yet I go on. I defend myself with words, explanations, thematic concept notes, and books. I scream internally. None of these works people admire and find beautiful and collect and value would ever have come into existence if it were not for me. I fan my tail and shake my feathers. Narcissus, when you gaze upon me, you gaze upon your twin. Meaning. I insist that artwork must have meaning. Can just pleasing the eye have meaning? No. A brief visual happiness? Yes. But eye candy, like real candy, has no substance, no nutrition that actually nourishes. Nourishes what? The soul? We've dismissed the very idea of one in our modern post-religious scientific times. The spirit? Isn't that just a rebranded soul? Or is it a reference to our core emotion, our ability to deal with life and proceed against adversity? If so, visual happiness, i.e. beauty, can be a brief stimulant, but it isn't sustainable. Meaning must be more than beauty, and this is why abstraction has such a difficult time to sustain a deep conversation with us, not that it doesn't talk, or it can't succeed. So rather than shifting gears and getting into art historical claptrap, I ought to just focus on the art of the Karkana. Many find it beautiful, sometimes astoundingly intricate, and often humorous. It is a soft, dark humor that opens up avenues of interpretation. But what does it mean? It depends, of course, on which image we are talking about, and any particular image can have multiple meanings. But is there an overarching theme? It is easy to say, and often my knee-jerk response to this question is to say that our art is about alienation. But how many artists have served up the same cliché of excuse in the past? There is truth in it, but it's become rather frivolous, the sort of thing art students cough up when they don't know what else to say. Otherness is another word, and is much too bandied about. However, it does apply to our art and the way I conceptualize it. Strangely, this does not, at least in my mind, apply to the original sepia-tone photograph shot with the Rolleiflex in the suite that became known as India Poems. I felt othered as the photographer, a white outsider immediately detectable as a foreigner within the context of India, yet I myself did not approach the people I made portraits of as others. Yes, they were Indians, and I was in what to me at that time was a strange land, but I approached people as people and made their image as such. An elderly woman with a scarf, a bicycle rickshaw driver, a woman with buffalo, a man with an ox cart. No, this was not documentary, and I made no attempt to delve into the social histories of these people. The photos were pictorialist in composition and tone, but I photographed with a respectful human eye, the eye of a man looking from one culture into another. I was tempted to write, from the very beginning, otherness was inherent in my work, but it was me, the photographer, who had a strong sense of being othered, both in the process of making photographs, but mostly when presented for exhibition. Some of the criticism I received for those early sepia photographs seemed guided more by ideological blindness than real insight. Sight, as it were. I became riled. It seemed that certain critics were looking and reacting and writing as if more concerned with the color of my skin than the images I had labored over. And labor I did. Those were the days of entire afternoons and evenings in the small, musty darkroom, dribbled with chemicals that had slopped to the floor, the plastic garbage container always full of wet or semi-dry prints that had been discarded for imperfections. I remember listening to NPR, National Public Radio, under the dark glare of the red light bulb. I had a counter for trays, developer, stop bath, and fixer. After each print was fixed, they received an inspection under the brighter light bulb that hung above Tommy's washer and dryer in the basement of our old place in Milwaukee, the former brick tavern that had been converted into a home. I'd eye any imperfection. Too dark here, not dark enough there. Needs more dodging and burning. The process would be repeated. Finally, I'd hit upon a formula for timing and adjustment that made good prints. They'd be washed endlessly to remove the trace chemicals that could later cause brown spots. Then a new process would start, the bleach bath and the sepia toning. Then wash, wash, wash again. Permanency was my aim. I had been propagandized into the importance of permanency by my school. Sounds foolish now, in this very impermanent world. The very idea of permanency seems a joke. I veered off tangent. I guess unappreciated work, or rather, attacked work, still smarts. It does for all artists, but that's a part of the game. We must play it. We must listen to criticism and let it seep deep enough into us for it to be understood. We can choose to accept some and reject some. We can learn to respond. It makes us more articulate and aware of what we ourselves are doing. The criticism that I received in those days may have once been a festering wound, but has largely healed now. It is just a small scar upon an otherwise healthy body. I have to admit that I learned from it. Criticism helped me grow. However, I was supposed to be writing about meaning. In the early miniatures that I made with RVJ, the character that I created with a hat that was a mix between fedora and Panama hat, red circular eyeglasses, yes water bottle, and generally a trusty Rolleiflex was very intentionally meant to represent me. Me, afraid of a lizard in a bed, standing with my partner Tommy in Udaipur watching the boys dive and swim. Me, photographing near a primitive version of Lake Pichula. This was, in fact, the first painting produced between the collaboration of RVJ and myself. What did these paintings mean? They struck an immediate chord with collectors, but I was unsure why. The paintings were not yet so refined. They were quaintly primitive. We first sold to Indian collectors at both Kashi Gallery in Kochi and Palette Art Gallery in New Delhi, where the exhibition traveled shortly thereafter. The miniatures came close to selling out. Respected art historians such as Kavita Singh were introduced to us. The fashion world showed up to the opening, which was unexpected. Were the sales in sympathy for the little me, for the minuscule white man trying to find his way in the vastness of a brown India? Or had the character become an everyman, a personage that all could relate to? Was high society laughing at this man's adventures and misunderstandings, or smiling with the feeling of recognition? South Delhi is, after all, not the rice fields of Hampi, nor the then dry lake of Udaipur. It is a refined world, Indian, yet Western. I'm not sure, but it seemed many saw themselves in these works, or at least they were close enough to the circumstances to sympathize. The meaning in each painting was different, yet all spoke of a certain class isolation and alienation in regards to the common man and the natural world. There was both pleasure and a timorous fun to be found in affinities. When writing about the old darkroom just above, the word de-skilled came to mind. I certainly found myself being de-skilled, ironically, at the very time I was trying to hone them to a higher level. Tommy and I were in Firenze, Florence, where we had rented a large apartment overlooking the Cafe Il Rifullo, which roughly translates to birds of a feather, and I was doing an independent study program with Romeo de Loreto at Studio Marangoni, the Center for Contemporary Photography. This was intensive darkroom work, alongside a guiding master of the craft. Romeo taught me much, and besides the technical parts, what he most taught was a careful eye and a thoughtful, perceptive patience. During this advanced study, Tommy and I had many visitors. One was my cousin Erica Green. She had with her an odd, quite large, cube-shaped contraption that she announced was a digital camera, in fact, one of the first models ever produced. "I'm the totally digital girl," she exclaimed quite happily, and she was, though her images were severely pixelated and the colors very off. I remember my teacher, Romeo, saying, "I'm not quite sure what this digital stuff is, but one thing I know for certain is it is not photography." Yes, Romeo, it was not photography. It soon came to be called digital imaging, and it took over like a leopard chasing a lumbering, aging goat. Photography, as we knew it, was dead. Yes, analog has its periodic comebacks in offbeat exhibition spaces, and the cult of alternative process photography keeps the faith in making some miraculous images. But everyone is now a photographer, and we keep even our magic lanterns in our thin jean pockets. We, the old-time chemical processors, were all de-skilled almost instantaneously. Rather, some of us maintained our skills, but the need for them became almost laughable. Like old dinosaur bones, our labor-intensive works and lab instruments became absurd, bound, like fossils, to be forgotten within museums. It is the third day of nicotine detox. I'm told the third to fifth days are the worst. I had cut back to just 4 cigarettes a day before Ganpat's arrival, which was making progress considering I was up to a small pack a day in Udaipur, and then I binged a bit with Ganpat while he was visiting, smoking more than usual, as smoking with Ganpat has always formed a bond between us. But he has more control than I do, more willpower. He can limit himself to 2 a day, 1 in the morning with coffee and 1 at night with whiskey, and he can stick to that. I found I never could. Now I'm trying full withdrawal. I have a malfunctioning heart valve that I've known about for almost 2 years. I have spots in my lungs. The doctor does a CT scan and says, "No change, but we better keep an eye on them. See you next year." Quitting is necessary. It will be a struggle, and I fear that my smoking days will always be missed. But there is a time in life when one simply must say goodbye, even to an old friend who turns, in fact, to be an old demon. Chapter 9. Everything We Are. This morning I was having a back and forth with Kabir, a younger man of Polish origin who has a gay lover in Thailand. He and Talk have been friends for years now. They have visited me in Udaipur, including a visit to the Varda studio roof, where I only take special guests. Our conversation over WhatsApp revolved around a fight he was having with some of his own friends on social media. Like me, Kabir can skew a bit conservative, but also liberal. Like me, he has problems with the woke, i.e., the postmodernist cult. Today he was complaining that a friend of his was accusing him of distancing himself from the LGBTQ community. His thoughts apparently too independent. He asked my opinion on gay culture. Is there one? A lot of people seem to think so, but I have qualms about it myself. Today, gay culture is associated, sadly, with promiscuity and drugs and parties and more parties, campy drag acts, trans singers and performers, and of course the omnipresent rainbow flags in whatever iteration is currently politically correct. That to me is not the gay culture I originally identified with. Growing up in the 1960s in Midwestern Milwaukee, the first gay culture I became aware of was via the Beat Poets, who could be found in the Milwaukee Public Library. This led to Walt Whitman and Gore Vidal and Oscar Wilde, and eventually to John Rechy's The Sexual Outlaw. To me, at that young age, gay culture seemed to be openly manifest in the literary world. Coming out to my parents at age 16 in 1968 was a truly radical thing to do in those days, much more so coming out to my friends at school. I was the first and only one to do so at my suburban high school. It was an experience that involved my being shunned, physically assaulted, ridiculed in class by bullies, snubbed by pretentious young girls, and just ignored by teachers. I found refuge in a small theater group of diverse misfits, again, literary, and together we rehearsed The Merchant of Venice for the state forensics competition. I played the Duke, i.e., the judge. I still remember Judy Detman's impassioned rendition of Portia's Pound of Flesh monologue and David Gary's incredibly shrewd portrayal of Shylock. I set my heart upon becoming a writer and vowed to major in literature and creative writing at college. I did not see the impending derailing of my plans by drugs. Andy Warhol came along, and Joe D'Alessandro. Suddenly there seemed a quite openly gay scene spreading in the world of art. Andy made the magazine covers and newspapers. Hollywood and television flirted with gay celebrities like Paul Lynde, and I delved into the vintage black and white films of Vincent Price that populated the Saturday afternoon TV time slots. The gay world was beginning to appear before my eyes, as if it had never been there before, and yet it most certainly was. I just hadn't noticed. So what exactly is gay culture? One could offer up a variety of notions: promiscuity, camp, bodybuilding, the movies, poetry, fashion. Song was introduced by Donovan in the 1960s, and Bowie and Queen and T-Rex and Mott the Hoople and the New York Dolls in the early 70s. Perhaps the word sensitive and artistic might cover it, but gay people hardly have a monopoly on those things. White parties? I guess I would call many of these things contemporary manifestations, but in the end, no one can really define what it is. If they do, they limit us. We are no longer a subculture. In the Western world, it is hard to even argue that we remain oppressed in any major degree. Perhaps that is sad. Oppressed people are driven to express themselves through jazz or blues or Jamaican reggae. It doesn't matter. The artistic wail echoes out of a beaten-down spirit. Once a group has joined the mainstream, can that any more be the case? I told Kabir to tell his friend that I'm a gay man, going on 70, now living a totally sexless life due to the physical changes of old age. I used to be a slut. I now surround myself with exclusively straight men, nearly all with wives and children, and I'm more than content to be adopted into these families at one level or another. Do I still consider myself gay? Of course. I am a part of gay culture? Yes, because gay culture now encompasses everything we are, no matter what, no matter where, no matter who. I've dived into this little spiel on gay culture as a means of getting back to meaning within my work. Gayness or associations with gayness has been there nearly from the start. Yes, there may have been a few semi-erotic photos in the original India poems The Photographs book. Within the text, I was open about both my relationship to Tommy and also my assistant Srinu. That caught the eye of several critics. I had also self-published a small paperback of my poems, a few of which were openly homoerotic, which I read at openings during the traveling exhibitions. I was being openly gay, but not centering my entire identity around it, nor was I shouting about it in my work. The gay element became a bit more prominent once we began to do the miniature paintings. From the seminal box set, The Secret Life of Waswo X Waswo, to the first direct collaboration with RVJ on The Danger of Photography, the gay life both swirled around the edges as well as occasionally came front and center. I followed that approach throughout. winning admirers or at least supporters within India's gay crowd. Still, the majority of paintings produced with the miniaturist Karkhana eschew the subject altogether. The figure in the white topi becomes just a traveling foreigner, at times an Orientalist, at times a simple or shocked observer, at times an unwitting participant in some minor, humorous drama. My self-representation became the everyman, but the everyman who just happened to be gay. Chapter 10, Materiality. I want to dive into another pool right now and swim in different murky waters. An article appeared online this morning that the NFT, non-fungible token, if I really need to explain that, is officially dead. According to several studies, most are worth 0 ETH right now, and even the big name Bored Ape type of stuff holding on to only a bit of value. Very minimum value. I wrote sarcastically on Facebook, who could have guessed? I never bought one, but I did sell one, at about $1 lakh. Sorry, the devil made me do it. Devil emoji, hysterical laugh emoji. Cruel? Maybe. But I never did see value in them. The fact people, some actual respected collectors, were buying them astounded me. What? Paying thousands of dollars or lakhs of rupees for what is basically a security-coded JPEG file? It made no sense. But then I asked myself, why? Is it because I am so attached to materiality? Is it that I think art cannot exist without materiality? Music is not material, yet we certainly consider it as art, even if it has moved from live performance, the 78 RPM and 33 RPM vinyl recordings, to reel tapes, then cassette tapes, and laser rainbowed CDs, and finally now only exists as a digital file. Even musicians and vocalists have been removed from some of techno and pop music. AI is now capable of writing not just songs, but lyrics. Has AI become an artist? It recreates AI images now, and many are incredible in execution. But they lack soul. As one meme put it, AI inadvertently made me believe in a soul, because it showed me what art looks like without one. We are treading into new, uncharted, and exceedingly complex territory. So, why was my reaction, and why still is my reaction, to scoff at the NFT? For me, I could never get my head around considering a computer file, or just an image, anything different than my own JPEGs that I look at every day on my laptop, or on the big desktop screen that I attach my laptop to for using Photoshop. A file is a file, even if it is coded into blockchain. Now, a moving image is something else. A film is created to be viewed upon a screen or projected upon a wall. It is a testament to the creative skills of the director, the writers, the actors, the prop stylists, the costume designers, and everything else. But does a still NFT do the same thing? Why is it created for viewing upon a screen rather than created to be admired in real life as a solid three-dimensional object? Aren't we all sick to death of being transfixed by screens? A good film, or even an opera, will transport you into a different world. Its constructed narrative and imagery will beguile the viewer into accepting that it is real, even if it is just realistic fantasy. The viewer falls through the screen or imagines himself within the life of the constructed reality. He or she lands in Oz and believes it. NFTs never had that quality. Not only did they lack tactility and physical presence, they failed to bring the viewer into their world. That I find fatal in art. It is a failure at art's basic purpose. Its basic purpose of persuading and constructing meaning, making a world that we wish to both explore and ponder. NFTs are not dead, I would argue. They were never truly alive. Chapter 11, Sri Mathie. Mary is upset this morning. It seems something has broken into the cage where her prized guinea fowl are locked for the night and slaughtered every one of them. They are each half-eaten. I immediately suspect the mammoth monitor lizard, old and wrinkled and ever menacing. I have nicknamed him Komodo, since to me he looks big enough to be a Komodo dragon. But Mary disagrees. It was probably a mongoose or two, she opines. They dug a hole. They go straight for the throats. These are big mongoose on Mary's plantation. The incident reminds me that everything eats everything. Even chickens are vicious killers. They'll eat anything that they can gobble up, even a mouse or a small snake. Nature is beautiful, but never pretty. Guy left early this morning. Guy, if I haven't already mentioned, is Mary's partner. He is sprite and quick to notice when something is amiss. I'm told that he used to work for the Gagosian galleries, and he comes from wealthy British stock. My art dealer friend Laura in the UK says that years back she sold a ton of top-end 20th century modernist paintings to Guy's family, who at the time maintained an enormous estate. Strange as it is, Guy and I hardly spoke about art at all, while we sipped Negronis in the great hall of Sri Mathie. He preferred to talk about the beach, the best restaurants in Unawatuna, just the right place to sit at the shack, a popular hangout for expats. The life expectancy of dogs and cats, the raising of chickens, the need to sell a calf, the calls of the peacocks. Guy seemed grounded as a man could be. He taught me to make a Negroni, a proper Negroni, not shaken, not stirred, but muddled with a glass muddling stick. Filling the jigger was a ritual in itself. He pounded into me the need for preciseness. 1 full jigger of gin, Tanqueray, 1 full jigger of Campari, and 1 just shy jigger of vermouth. Guy was meticulous about how I poured, and I was shouted at for pouring over the stainless steel shaker. "What if an extra drop falls in?" he'd shout, and equally scold at me if I overpoured and dripped a little upon the counter. The ice mildly crushed, and after muddling strained away. Only 1 large perfect cube of ice was allowed in the drinking glasses. Yes, proper British mixology, even if the Negroni was invented in Italy. Guy baked the most delicious breads in the Sri Mathie kitchen, and sometimes had enough overstock to sell a few. He gave me one when I first arrived, and afterward I must have bought 3 or 4. It is magnificent bread, something I miss in Udaipur, and salted butter and mango jam is always available here. Guy made a point of coming to the door of the Forrest House and dropping off 1 final bread last night. As usual, it was wrapped in a pristine white tea towel. This is only the 4th day, and I'm told days 3 to 5 are the worst. Well, I'm sitting in my usual smoking spot, in one of the side-by-side old colonial chairs looking into the forest. I wasn't thinking about it, but suddenly I realized I have no craving for smokes. None. In the morning when Sundaruan drove me to the ATM and the grocery store, I realized that I could smell things again. I noticed the smell of fresh-cut grasses in the field as we drove by in the tuk-tuk. I noticed the warm, comforting smell of smoke emanating from below a cooking pot. I noticed the smell of an apple I picked up in the store. I noticed a faint, oily scent coming from a woman next to me in the checkout queue. For the first time, as Sundarun joined me in the tuk-tuk, raising his arm to the roof to get in, I noticed his faint but sweet body odor beneath his pale blue shirt. Later, when I went for a late afternoon swim, a light rain once again splashing the surface of the pool, I realized that I could actually do laps, my simple breaststrokes, via inhaling through my nostrils, not my mouth. I've not been able to do this for years. At Tommy's pool in Bangkok, I am always gasping through my mouth. Yes, I cut down smoking only by a little in my early weeks at Sri Mathie, and now I'm only into 4 days of complete withdrawal. But this time I think I will beat it. For the sake of my heart and lungs, I have to. I promised Ganesh. I want to get back to art, not just physically get back to art via flights back to Udaipur and the art gang, but get back to art in a far more conceptual way than I have managed in a long time. The Gauri dancers' book and exhibitions were fine, and writing and publishing Karkhana was not only a major feat for us, it also did so much to articulate our working style. I have no regrets for these things, but I feel I am capable of writing far more in depth about art and society than I normally do. This crazy book, filled with memories and recalls of the days here in Sri Mathie, and jump after jump trying to explain the different phases of my art, is perhaps a wild beginning. But it is not the end. The nicotine withdrawal has semi-fueled these typings, and no, it has not turned out to be quite as poetic nor illuminating as I had hoped, but it is a start. I want to write at length at how postmodernism has affected the art of our time and the wider art community in such an adverse way. I want to write about the new power and control that has artists, curators, museum directors, critics, and gallerists so painfully addicted to only one lens through which to view the art of our times. Addicted like nicotine or opium, not the opium of the masses, but in fact, the opium of the elites. We live in an era of so-called social justice, not justice, but social justice. Justice in the traditional sense of the term is of little interest or concern for today's elite movers and shakers, especially within the humanities, which includes the liberal arts and visual art itself. If a man makes a statement and is accused of sexism, it is taken as fact, no further context needed, and if a man is accused of sexual harassment, his career is effectively over. No need for proof or even details of the accusation. It would, quote, demean, unquote, a woman, or even, quote, force violence, unquote, upon her, to have her accusations challenged. The age of believe all women arrived some years ago, and I myself was caught up in this trap when some comments I had made on Facebook managed to outrage a female Indian artist in New York. I did not think my comments particularly egregious, and they were not made on her timeline or her posts. They were part of a larger discussion I was having with friends within the public forum. To cut to the chase, this woman, strangely, after a 6-month lapse, suddenly tagged all of my Facebook friends in a post demanding that they remove me from their friends list because I supported rape, quote unquote. If they did not obey, she would unfriend them. Since the artist in question wielded quite a bit of social power among New York's expat Indian scene, her demand came from a position of power. I support rape. That was news to me. What had I been guilty of was arguing that the picketing and protests of a final retrospective of a famous Indian photographer due to a rape charge brought by this woman after 20 years of silence seemed unfair to me. I suspected it was more publicity stunt than a real grievance, and to me an artist's retrospective is akin to a funeral. Decorum and respect for accomplishments must take precedence over any grudges and grievances the assembled may have. This basic sense of manners was being violated, in my opinion, and I expressed that. If the artist who insisted she had been raped 20 years prior had a real case, that could be aired passionately and vociferously after the dead artist had been given his due. Yet I did lose friends, not many, but a few, obeyed the demands that they cancel me on social media. Among these was a gallery owner and a gallery manager that were just in the process of considering exhibitions for me. Those exhibitions never happened. I cannot help suspect that a fledgling New York career had been snipped before it even had the chance to bud. I even considered bringing a defamation lawsuit, but to do so in New York would be exorbitantly expensive and time-consuming. I figured it would be better to just focus on our work. My case is hardly atypical. It has happened to many. Some make the news, most, like mine, did not. I was just quietly removed from a lucrative market before I even had a chance to prove myself. I'd like to say, once more, a huge thank you to all the many friends and artists who stood with me during that trying time. As we all know, the same sort of games play out within racial and sexual contexts on a daily basis within the West, and sometimes in the East as well. This is not a pursuit of justice, which requires a careful and complete examination of the facts, an unbiased jury, an impartial judge, and if conviction is found, a reasonable punishment that fits the seriousness of the crime. We have gone beyond all of that now, or rather, discarded it. Social justice, modeled as it is on Gramscian Marxist theory, no longer maintains the sanctity of the individual and individual rights, but rather upholds the integrity of various group identities arranged in hierarchies of privilege and oppression. Social justice does not bat an eye if an innocent person is thrown in jail, as long as that person belongs to an identity it considers oppressive. Conversely, social justice does not care about the release of an obviously guilty person, as long as that person is seen to be a member of a marginalized group, and thus needing the special rights afforded to oppressed peoples. It is, at its heart, a sick and prejudiced movement, a movement that veers away from free speech and democratic process in favor of equity by any means. It is a movement that actually upholds stereotypes, often coddling minorities as if they were children that need the constant protection of overbearing parents, these generally being the ever guilt-ridden white liberals. Thus the elites and the compassionate dupes that unwittingly support them become the real authoritarians, more than willing to hound, mob, and condemn people without trial, and more with the help of compliant governments willing to put their opposition in social prison for thought crime. I am not sure if my host would want me to repeat this story, but I will write it down. Mary Storm also was canceled some years back, but in a much more serious sort of way. She was still working in academia, spending much of her time in India, a country whose artistic history had become the primary focus of her work. Thus, Head and Heart, Valor and Self-Sacrifice in the Art of India, the published book of her research, which won her academic acclaim within the niche subject that examines the ancient art of the subcontinent, sits upon my desk as I write. It is a rich and thorough book, the sort with plenty of references and footnotes. To say it is well researched is an understatement. This research led Mary to many a fact-finding expedition in India, and she settled down to live first in New Delhi, then Rajasthan, for an extended period of time. I am far from an academic, being a blunt, simple, Midwestern kind of guy who stumbles when articulating verbally and has a hard time remembering names and facts quick enough to impress. Yet I see myself in Mary. She too has been wounded by the justice of the social. Mary lost her academic career some years ago, or rather, she was asked to leave. The reason? She had been leading a group of young Indian American students on a historical tour of Kolkata. She took them to the colonial cemetery as a part of that tour. It is there that she made her fatal mistake. She pointed to a grouping of small stone memorials and asked the young Indian Americans to take a look at the dates of birth and the dates of death. Easy calculation spoke of early deaths. Most all had died in their late teens or very early 20s. Mary, evil white Orientalist as she became to be seen, then asked the students why they thought the youthful colonizers died so soon after arrival. Most were sailors and workmen, setting off to the new land to find work and perhaps even make their fortune, a British version of the Go West young man that was invoked upon the youth of early European Americans. The answer did not please the students. Most, she explained, died quickly of malaria, typhoid, and dysentery, plus a myriad of other diseases that found weak European blood, lacking resistance and antibodies, an extremely easy target. Later, Mary learned from the higher-ups of her academic ladder that she had offended some of the students for, quote, making apologies concerning colonialism, unquote, and, quote, dignifying the colonizers, unquote. In our brave new Orwellian world, that was cause enough for dismissal. One must never appear to be defending the white man, even if just imparting factual information. One must never appear to seem sympathetic for what is now the indefensible race. These are the new rules of Western academia and Western society as a whole. I am very happy that I live in India. This contagion is not yet spread far there. Chapter 12. White. My dear reader, you are now more than halfway through this rambling book and probably still do not know where it is leading. Well, surprise, this is not a book at all. It is just a series of blank pages that I'm filling up with thoughts and descriptions and rants as they come to mind. Perhaps you find some of what you've managed to wade through, this muddy, slippery, winding, and unclear river, a bit interesting. If not, I assume that you stopped reading or listening long ago. These are just bored typings from a Forrest House somewhere in the Sri Lankan jungle, if we want to be pseudo-poetic about it. And these writings really head nowhere. They fill up the emptiness of white. I noticed that Narcissus, when he came to my glass door this morning, had a feather missing just below the wings and just above the tail. His skin was exposed, and it was white. White like a chicken wrapped in a plastic cling wrap and on sale in the poultry aisle of your local supermarket. His skin was actually quite similar to my own, though looking younger and smoother. I felt sorry for him. It was as if he was missing a chunk of armor, a part of his shield. His elaborate costume had failed, and for the first time I realized that he was not such a colorful deity of beauty after all. He was, in fact, like me, just sporting a fanciful robe. Plucked from that, he was a naked white bird, white like me. I'm told by my Desi Miwari friends that peacocks make the best of meals, their meat superior to all other birds. But it is illegal to kill them in Rajasthan, much less eat them. They are officially royal and national birds, and one dares not touch one carelessly, much less harm one. That coat of many colors, beauty, has served them well. Is this why they have nearly forgotten how to fly? It is often said that art becomes decadent near the end of civilizations. Decadence of society, which includes its culture and art, forebodes a fall. I'm not sure if Petronius was decadent as a man, but his Satyricon certainly portrays the exotically well-fed elites of Rome during the 1st century AD, a point in time when Romans succumbed to the never-ending pleasure palaces of entitlements, while the empire crumbled around them. And Colpius and his presumed slave and catamite Giton, a 16-year-old boy, made the tour of a self-centered, self-indulgent society on its last legs. In what survives of the great and much longer manuscript, a feast is described in which the attendees dine upon lark's tongue and aspic, honeyed dates, and, of course, peacock. The actual description of the menu for this feast goes on for pages. It would put the tiny tidbits in the film The Menu to shame. A noticeable shift in sculptural style begins to take place at this time. The highly detailed classical style the Romans had copied from the Greeks gives way to a much more simplified, some might even say primitive style. This is evident even in the depiction of the Roman emperors. Various theories are offered up as to why this occurs, from a lack of skilled craftsmen due to the seemingly endless attacks of barbarian tribes, to a general societal malaise brought about by the ramifications of these attacks, to even the need for artists to produce quickly due to the quickness with which rulers were dethroned and new ones throned. A few examples of classical realism survive from this time period, and it is argued it is proof of two competing styles that were in rivalry for patronage. I find this both true and false. There might have been competition for the more skilled artisans, but my guess is they were still the most in demand among the least debauched. One theory, interestingly, puts forth the premise that, since Christianity was on the rise, and the Emperor Theodosius made it the official religion of Rome with the Edict of Thessalonica in 380 AD, the exact images of the emperors were no longer required to be so detailed. They only represented the new conceptual theology. That was the real new power. Replace theology with ideology, and we might realize why so much conceptual art of our time seems to be made by equally unskilled hands. It is no longer the object that is important, but its ideological foundations that trumps all. Chapter 13, Village. This book is perhaps becoming a garbled notebook for a much longer and deeper book that needs to be written. I doubt that I'm capable of that. Perhaps I'm too old. Douglas Murray could do a fine job of it. There are many things that have come with age that I did not expect. Of course, we all expect to weaken in our mental and physical abilities. We expect that we might get some arthritis or have a bout with digestive and intestinal problems, things we never worried about in our youth. If we are married, we hope that grandchildren will come to us and sit upon our laps. If we are gay, as I am, we begin to worry about who will take care of us if we become so feeble or diseased that we can no longer take care of ourselves. Extended families have many values, and the care of aged relatives is one. I've learned this only in India. In the U.S., the family is far too deconstructed, even non-existent in this postmodern world. There are many reasons for the multitude of anxieties that currently grip Western societies, but this is certainly a major one. In contrast, I see much more confidence among extended Indian families, even among the lower middle classes and the near to poor. They have a security net among family members who will most always be there for them during hardship and rough times. They also have the more serene and joyful spirit that comes with both religious belief and customs, coupled to lower expectations as to what they will accumulate or manage to do within the course of their lives. Instead of dreaming about mansions or utopias, joys are found in simple things, taking the children to a small mela, buying a small bauble or bangles for the wife, lighting incense in the family shrine, the simple click of a photograph. A ride on a bike in a mild rain becomes minutes of happiness rather than a dreaded ordeal. Indians accept. They accept fate. Hinduism teaches that, and so does Buddhism. If it is your fate, you accept it and make the most out of what it is. Christianity and Islam are far more filled with presumptions that a good life can be secured via acts and duties. For these religions, you make your own fate depending on your own good or bad decisions. After 20 years, I've come to prefer the Hindu way. Through keeping a happiness in my heart, controlling the delusion that I am always master of my own fate is a hard thing for an old man to learn. Each day I try. Rereading the above, I realize that perhaps that is why I have so much difficulty with the postmodern art of our times. It goes without saying that Gramscian postmodernism is eager to degrade, confuse, and eventually replace the family unit. Why? Because, as Vice President Kamala Harris recently said, they are not your children. They are all of our children. This, like earlier incarnations of the same idea, i.e., Hillary Clinton's "It Takes a Village," contains the ominous question of just whose children are they if they are not yours? The answer is, of course, not the proverbial African village, but the monolithic state. Gramscian communists want to control your children just as much as they wish to control your art. You can already see the fruits of this, as in 2020, when a new sort of Red Guard burst forth from the universities to pull down statues, demand books be censored or banned in the name of decolonization. Social media mob dissenters encouraged riots and looting, if they were not themselves actual participants, and most worryingly, turned against their own families. OK Boomer was the least of it. This is the collectivist notion of child rearing and its results. We have already seen it in far more extreme forms, in Mao's China and Pol Pot's Cambodia. Now the same tactic, with the same intended results, is rising again, mostly in the West. I sincerely pray it does not metastasize in India. Yes, a good village will help provide a growing child with a system of support and education, but villages are firstly made of families, mothers and fathers and grandmothers and granduncles. The family is a rock of stability, and it is exactly for this reason that it is one of the first targets of communist revolutionaries. For them, the family is secondary to the state, and in the extremes, there are desires to abolish it. This arrogance of the leftist state manifests itself in such things as the idea that school teachers ought to, sometimes under state compulsion, keep a child's wishful thinking about changing genders a secret from their parents. In an authoritarian leftist state, the government is all wise, and you, the parents, can not only be left in the dark, you can be abandoned. In California, we already have seen the state remove children from non-affirming families. I cannot believe I am typing down such a thing in the current year. Is this where our battle for gay civil rights has ended? Actually, no. Unless seriously combated, the extremes will extend even further. Chapter 14. God, The Necessity of Invention. I haven't seen Narcissus for a few days. Things are changing here at Sri Mathie. Guy is gone and Mary is more and more engrossed in work. The driving rains with their cooling gray clouds have ended. The sun is out nearly all day now. The pool is warmer, perhaps a bit too warm, and the Forrest House heats up in the middle of the day with light cascading through the two skylights in the roof. I have the fans buzzing constantly. Evening swims and evening Negronis are much looked forward to, but the meals have become less impressive. Hamburgers one night, hot dogs another, both with tasty side dishes, of course, but hardly comparable to the roast chicken I was served the day of my arrival. It's understandable. Food is both scarce and expensive in the markets as Sri Lanka's economy continues to suffer. The government is corrupt. China has taken grip of the country's debt. Petrol prices are high. Tourists have been frightened away. It does not look good. Other than her morning swim, Mary spends the majority of her day in her air-conditioned office, typing away at corrections as she edits students' theses. This editing service that she provides at a fee sadly keeps her away from finishing a newly edited and republished version of Head and Heart that her publisher has asked her for. But times are a bit tough for everyone here in Sri Lanka. Mary gets overwhelmed and exhausted. I don't blame her. And with Guy away, it becomes doubly stressful. Things are winding down, as is this book. By next week at this time, I will be waking up in my bed in Udaipur with 2 Indian hornbills knocking at the window pane and green parrots making flashes of almost neon green between my living room window and the lush-treed mountain across our little street. I'm beginning to miss the apartment and Ganpat and the artists and Udaipur in general. This is what happens at the end of every adventure, isn't it? One either chooses to inhabit a new land or return to the comforts of home, and for me, Udaipur will always be my home. It adopted me. This is one thing I cannot stress enough. The love that India in general, and Udaipur in particular, has gifted me is immeasurable. It would take another book to fully chart my rise as an artist in India. The crazy coincidences, the kind introductions, the long debates, the welcoming gallerists, the unbiased and pointed reviews of critics, the newspaper editors and feature writers who first noticed me and my art so long ago, and the passionate camps of thought that form both in favor of my existence and against it. But mostly, I benefited from the open-minded Indian men and women who gently nudged me along a path, warning me of roadblocks and pitfalls and guiding like iridescent compasses in a directionless night. Most importantly, they lent the value of supportive friendships. These wonderful people stay with me to this day. They soothe me when I become distressed or feel resentful, and they chasten me if I dare feel sorry for myself. Yes, I have been the beneficiary of white privilege, but also the target of prejudiced hatreds. What we need to always remember is that we all benefit from one sort of privilege or another. The privileges of good health, or good looks, or a quick-thinking mind, and also the prejudices and biases that without fail cause others to misconstrue every one of us. This is life. It is good to count one's blessings. It is good to concentrate upon the positives rather than the negatives. It is good to improve oneself each day and extend a hand to lift people up with you. God has been back in my life for many years now. Not the Christian God, though I do pray at night with the familiar folding of hands, nor the Hindu pantheon of deities, which can never be fully elaborated. Going back nearly 18 years, I remember my former assistant, dear, sweet, bright-eyed Shrinu, who sank into the hell of a bipolar nightmare from which he never escaped. I loved Shrinu as a son. That episode in my life caused me to pray again. It caused me to look to the sky, the night sky which my brother and I had once so closely examined and mapped out with our telescope, scoffing at the irrationality of religion. This time I looked toward the sky to implore God, or the powers of the universe, or whatever you wish to call it. I pleaded for help getting through a nightmare which became as much my own as Shrinu's. There was a realization in me. I returned to unsubstantiated belief. Life suddenly looked different again. As Voltaire famously said, if God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him. Voltaire may have meant this ironically, even sarcastically, but I take it very literally. Not only are societies held together by religion, our individual hearts and psyches are also. It is necessary to believe in a power greater than that which exists on earth, and we pray that this power directs our worlds in ways that are complex, sometimes not understandable, but aimed toward a divine understanding. Chapter 15, Magic. I've forgotten to mention many things during these writings. Things happen that don't get chronicled, and things get chronicled that never happened. I've stuck to the truth as I know it, though lapses of memory over a 1-month period are bound to happen. I did not write much about Ganpat's visit, though it was a welcome respite from the routine here. We swam together, ate breakfast and dinner together, sipped mojitos on the beach, made visits to Galle Fort, lunched at the Mango Cafe in the old city, posed with the stilt fishermen, swam again, cocktailed again, and smoked. I more than he. Those were my last days of my nicotine delusion, before the withdrawal began. We also enjoyed a magic show, performed by the Russians. Did I tell you about the Russians? They're a nice young couple, living next door in the smaller and less open space that Mary has named the cottage. They swim together when the pool is empty and eat in their quarters. I generally give at least one of them a wave when I walk by. They always seem busy at their laptops, earbuds in, madly typing away. I am told by Mary that they are digital nomads, doing work while they travel, but they have holed up here at Sri Mathie for a good 6 weeks. There is some suspicion that they are evading the military draft. If I were their age and Russian, I would be too. Mary has also hosted, for a while, a group of Ukrainian refugees. Wars make for strange entanglements, and those who evade it or escape from it are just as much in the web, yet also freer and not as trapped as their countrymen. One night, while Guy was still here, he announced that there would be a magic show. The Russian boy, whose name I will keep anonymous, was in fact a self-taught magician. 2 other denizens of Sri Mathie joined us that night as well. Tilly, a Scottish man with a strong heart and big head, and Sean, his partner, a lovely Welsh woman, looking very healthy, but battling lymphoma. A few of Mary's expat neighbors wandered over as well. The performance was so much better than anyone anticipated, beginning with mostly card tricks, each more perplexing than the next, moving through a bit of humorous but confounding escapism, and ending with a random calling out of numbers from the audience, myself included, which when totaled on a calculator produced a work of art. An oil painting was produced that had been painted well before the show, and on it was painted our randomly generated number. Impressive enough, but when the Russian magician inverted the painting, the same number looked exactly like the words Sri Mathie. Amazement and gasps and laughter filled the library room before the claps erupted. This was magic. None of us could explain it. It is easy to conflate religion with magic. Some do that by suggesting trickery and a suspension of our healthy skepticism. They will say, the sorcery of religion and the deliberate hoaxing of the masses is one of the many ways the lower classes have been kept chained to their drudgery. The powers of the keepers of the faith work hand in hand with the powers of the state. There is some truth to this, of course, and history is replete with examples. However, as always, there are other ways of looking at it. Today I would argue that religion, or rather a strong spiritual belief, gives hope and comfort and joy to the common people, as well as those far more comfortable. Belief in God is a kind of belief in magic, but a magic one feels to be real. If we open ourselves up to spiritual belief, we begin to see it everywhere, in the magic of nature, in the smiles of young children, in the loving and loyal eyes of a wife, in the long-held handshake of a friend, in the loving touch of a partner, in the dutifulness of a husband, in the first cry of a newborn, in the celestial glory of the night sky. My brother and his telescope taught me many things, but his strong adherence to only a rational view of our universe closed him off to that wonderful feeling of the magic of life and the unknown, the ever-expanding, the all-encompassing and evolving. Yes, it is possible for belief and science to not only coexist, but converge in bewildering ways. The magic of keeping spirituality, God, in the heart, is what today's neo-communists, as well as historical communists, fail to grasp. Their utopias are built on claims of compassion and desires for equity, but in their rationality, mixed with the unawareness of their own biases, their constructed social structures and societies lack not only magic, but even a semblance of heart. It is for them as if they are playing a game of we must balance absolutely everything out to attain fairness, failing to realize the painful monotony of a totally balanced landscape, composition, or society. Humans long for difference, for the ability to strive, to self-improve, and to stand out from the crowd, to become leaders and impressive personages. Individualism is central to most human hearts, even if they choose to pretend it is not. The only way a perfectly equitable society can be created is thus through extreme limitations of freedom and an all-seeing authoritarianism. We have already seen this in the countless countries that have embarked upon the communist experiment in the last century. China's social credit scoring system has already been outsourced to places in the West, most notably England and Canada. Say or protest the wrong thing, and you may find your bank account being frozen. There can be no magic in such countries, no freedom to choose what to believe, and no freedom to hold official narratives in disbelief. Communism, or actually in today's world, the unholy nexus between wealthy elites, corporates, and the social equity crowd, creates its own religion with its own unquestionable beliefs, creeds, decrees, and punishments. They become the worst of Puritans, and witch hunts have become frighteningly, tediously common. Heresy is not allowed. This is not keeping happiness in your heart. This is not opening up to the joys of the spiritual. It is a pathway to hell, a hell many seem intent upon creating right on this earth. Once created, and with the aid of AI, I doubt there will be any chance to escape. This is where the happiness of the masses lie? I highly doubt it. It has rained all day, a forceful, unrelenting rain, but now it has finally stopped. The sky is still dark, and water trickles from the jungle leaves. I see Sundaruan gently guiding the cows back to shelter. I guess they have grazed freely today, even in this rain, but now they are tied up and tucked in before the total darkness comes. I have not seen Narcissus today at all. Where do peacocks go when it rains? Where do artists go? I don't want to end this book on a negative note, but I predict a trying time ahead for the artists of this world. New technologies and non-human intelligence will make it difficult for the artists of older schools to survive. Even the visual postmodernists will find it difficult, but I'm sure they'll find ways to coldly adapt. Their art was never based in magic anyway. Traditional artists, like my team back in Udaipur, may survive, even thrive as keepers of the flame of beauty, skill, magic, and spirituality. But if society around them shifts too much, will they find a place? I fear for them. It sounds horribly Orientalist and colonialist and white saviorish, but I worry about all of them, even the two that left me this year, as a father worries about children. But who am I to worry or to imagine that they will not be able to survive on their own? That is horribly white of me, isn't it? It is time for the pool. I want to stay cool. I want to wash away my sins. Waswo X Waswo, The Forrest House, Sri Lanka, September 2023.
अकेला चला मैं अगर कुछ ना मिला तो क्या गम है मनमौजी यहाँ दिल हरदम है अब खो भी जाओ तो मेरा मन है ये आसमां ये वादियाँ ढूंढता मुझे तू है कहाँ तेरा मेरा ये रास्ता तुझसे जुदा